Welcome back to the Federal Executive Forum on Federal News Network. We're talking about data analytics and artificial intelligence, and got a fantastic group of CDOs. And we're talking about specific programs. I want to throw it over to you, Nicholas, at Snowflake, and tell us about a specific program you'd like to highlight.
Yeah, thanks, Luke. There's a lot of examples out there in the world, but I think probably the most prominent that I want to talk about is some of the COVID response work that Snowflake has been a part of. I hate to give COVID credit for anything in the modern world, but the reality is when we talk about data sharing, collaboration, and the government learning and the public learning from the government learning, COVID's probably the strongest example we have. I think a lot of the sort of stick that CDOs can wave around these days is as big as it is because of the great work gained by COVID. Snowflake has been an integral part of several states' response, and also a bit at the federal level on the research side, and also on the tracking of PPE, the tracking of case data. That data being able to be shared with the public allows transparency, which honestly, that's where trust comes from. If you're transparent about why you're putting legislation in place, or you're requiring a mask, or a vaccine works or doesn't work, data is the only way to achieve transparency, which is the only way to achieve trust. That kind of mentality where we have a lot of data being used for a great purpose, and then transparency and trust being built on top of sharing that data, is always something worth highlighting, and COVID's a great example.
We've talked about COVID off and on this show over the last 15 months, so relevant. And as we mature as a community in regards to securing the data, analyzing the data, et cetera, I think it certainly is timely. Mike, let's talk about a specific program at DHS that you'd like to highlight. I know you just got on duty there, but you've been in that community for a while. There's a lot of focus on the various activities. What's sort of, in the hopper right now that you'd like to highlight?
Well, Luke, thanks for the question. And this is something near and dear to me. People talk about big data all the time. One of the things I'm fond of is little data, and where you can find some real synergy between different subsets of little data, and you bring that data together, and you can make a data product that matters. So Alan talked a little bit about data literacy, and Nick talked about tools, and then Nicholas talked about sort of bringing all that together. And then lastly, Nicholas was talking about COVID. So with all those things in mind, here's what happened. We had this COVID situation, and our Chief Readiness Support Officer, Tom Shalecki, and his deputy, Trey Watkins, they said, hey, we have a real property question. How much of our real property is relevant now? How much of it will be relevant as we move into the future? And what's the usage? What's the real usage? So we gave that group some tools. We gave them some data that they didn't normally have access to. And I'm specifically talking about network and login data. So they're meshing a small data set, little data, not big data, but they're using the tools, and they're taking physical security sensor data, meshing it with network activity data. And we have now a map of usage of all the buildings and real property in DHS. And they're using that data to make defined, specific decisions about leases, about square footage, about occupancy that we've never been able to do before. And to me, that's a real victory down at the program offices. Those guys are pioneers, and they and their team have put this entire concept to use for DHS and for federal government.
That's interesting that you say that. Again, a reference, a nexus to COVID, right? Because of the different operating model that we're working under now, right? And how important that is, and a different use case that obviously is super important, something you probably wouldn't be thinking about. But a fantastic example. So thank you very much for that. Alan, how about over at UltraX? Tell us about a specific program you'd like to highlight that you're working on across the spectrum.
It's impossible to pick just one, so I'm gonna try two. I'll do one federal and one state. So the U.S. Census, we've done a lot of work with them, and watching them automate some of their processes. They had a process where they were producing insights on economic indicators, and historically they had really a manual process where site inspectors were collecting survey data, and they had to manually collect it and compile it, analyze it every month. really time consuming and one that could have errors introduced because of all that manual process. And they took Alteryx and really took some new data sources. They now use satellite imagery to supplement that structured data, using machine vision and really automated data collection processes. They take tens of thousands of municipalities worth of data and run it through a full automation. And now they're able to really accelerate the speed to get that insight, improve the sample size of data, because now they don't really have to sample, they can use all the data, really increasing the granularity of that insight that they give out. And that creates more value for the people, the stakeholders that are using that. And one of the cool things here, again, is we see this ability to upskill, that these domain experts that have really deep knowledge of that process were able to do it themselves. And that's really exciting to see. And then one other example, since COVID hopefully is on its way out, the state of Florida, when their unemployment system really crashed under the weight of COVID, they used Alteryx to really take and unify all of that cloud-based collection that they had in Google Forms, actually, and automate that process, taking 76 different workflows and being able to carve through 2 million unemployment applications with greater speed and accuracy, and no longer having the system crash. And so whether it's that very kind of more tactical response to, in this case, a pandemic, or really up-leveling the levels of insight that an agency was giving, we see just huge impact at organizations really all over the world.
Yeah, great use cases there, and interesting concepts both on both commercial and public sector. Nitesh, how about at FAA? I read about a lot of different fascinating things that are going on over there. You want to highlight one program where you're using this data analytics, perhaps artificial intelligence, to further the program?
Yes, Luke, as you say, a lot of wonderful work going on throughout FAA, so it's hard to kind of zero in on one. Mike's example reminded me of an organization that is doing a couple of things, so let me kind of zero in on and highlight the work of our air traffic operations safety organization. So as you can imagine, they have a tracking system for tracking, reviewing, approving safety analysis. They call it the Safety Management Tracking System. It produces risk management documentation, supports the process itself for risk management, and allows for data sharing of the safety risk analysis across the national airspace. Now, for a safety critical operation such as ours, this is an area where human expertise is paramount, right? It's a very expert-driven domain, but machine learning and AI can augment such efforts. So to Mike's point, not all efforts are big data analysis efforts. So ATO, Air Traffic Operations Safety, undertook a project to use machine learning and advanced analytical techniques to improve the quality of the tracking data, so that they can identify gaps in the data. They can improve the consistency of the safety analysis for future projects. So another example, briefly, from the same organization kind of highlights how they are leveraging work which we have already done on all these, deploying these technologies. So we have, as I said, a large data environment, a data platform in the cloud. So ATO Safety was able to use this for a project called Aviation Risk Identification and Assessment, or ARIA. So it's a system, it's a collection of process and microservices that can be leveraged to analyze potential risks across a wide variety of air travel domains. They first focused on risk of encounters in the air. Now they are focusing on, so they are using machine learning to improve the events that they focus on versus just looking for compliance. They're identifying risk scores for potential safety events and focusing the limited availability of resources that we have from a human point of view on the higher risk items. Now they're taking it to the ground for ground movement of aircraft. They have an upcoming enhancement which will look at controlled flight into terrain. So that team is actually leveraging the enterprise capabilities that we built in the best way possible. They're a great partner. They push the boundary. They kind of making us look for enhancements to the enterprise capabilities which we built. So these are a couple of examples in our main mission area for safety. There are dozens of examples in operational efficiency, and so for our DevOps operation is looking at predictive analytics to improve the technical operations, which again, COVID and the forced remote work has pushed the agency in those areas. But your request was for an example or two, so I'll stop there.
Right, and fascinating. Again, a first of small data, little data versus big data. But these are use cases that are real time and right in front of these operators, and super important. I think it's fascinating to highlight these cases. Typically, we talk about as you said, these larger type of lofty type of programs. So great examples by all of you. Nick, how about over at Pure Storage? Can you give us an example of a program you'd like to highlight?
Yeah, absolutely. And this next one is in Tom's hemisphere. So the Naval Surface Warfare Crane, about 3 years ago, acquired a dedicated platform for doing artificial intelligence research. And subsequently, with the growth of that platform, they made it available broadly as an artificial intelligence high performance computing as a service platform in the Navy's high performance computing catalog. So we're seeing the expansion of the availability of artificial intelligence resources, and particularly the processing architecture for that, being deployed across entire services, which gives them resources on obviously unclassified and protected networks for supporting an entire range of literally every endeavor for machine learning and artificial intelligence applications. So we've been very proud to partner with Crane to continue to refine that and make it available and sustain it, of course.
Very important program, and I'm glad you're highlighting that, and for the good of the order. I want to talk about priorities. Tom, I'm going to start with you. Can you talk to us about, just give us your top 2 or 3 priorities there at the Navy that you're going to be focusing on this year?
Yeah, sure thing. So you know, it's interesting over the last couple of years, and not only my time in the Army, but also now in the Department of the Navy, the priorities are really starting to shift a little bit, right? So we're making a lot of progress in some of the more fundamental things. But for the next 12 months or so, we're really focusing in on inventorying our data, knowing where it is, knowing what it is, knowing what its sensitivity level is, what system it's in. And then more importantly, this is going to be the challenge, is knowing what systems talk to what other systems, so we know how the data flows throughout the environment. So that's something that we're digging in on now. That is actually an offshoot of a broader initiative that we're calling Supernova, which is a data rationalization effort. And so, you know, Nick mentioned the high performance computing environment. That's something we've been working with the analytic folks over in the N7 on the Navy side. So they have this thing called the Analytic Master Plan, which is an attempt to kind of organize the Navy in terms of how we're going to do analytics at scale. And so that inventorying is going to be important to know, you know, where that data exists. And then that'll allow us to, you know, not only know what we have, but how to protect it properly, how to position it properly, make sure that the people that need it have access to it, ready access to it, right? And then also allow us to make sure that we're using authoritative data sets, or what we call originating data, rather than some sort of derivative data that has been, you know, mucked with in some way or manner or fashion or form. So that cataloging effort and that Supernova data rationalization effort are going to be really important to us moving forward. And then the next thing I think that we're really going to focus in on, make a big push on anyway, is really trying to communication and upskilling of the workforce through that Acumen effort that I mentioned earlier. I think that's going to be really essential for us making progress. And so once we understand where our data is and what that data is, and maybe the cleanliness of it, the quality level of it, and you know, typically we call it veracity, but really broadly, can we trust the data for decision-making purposes and to create that operational advantage, is an open question, right? So we've done some basic data maturity modeling right now, and you know, out of a 5 or not near 5. Right? So it's not unsurprising. The results are not unsurprising, but how do we start moving that needle? And so the last thing, again, I think I mentioned earlier, is just really starting to use data for performance management. And so that's going to be really important to not only look at ourselves in a way that is very benign and say, let's just be honest about where we are in the story, and then start looking for those drivers, the levers that we can pull that are going to make the most impact. And so these creation of the driver trees that we're calling them, and finding of all the variables that we have, which ones are going to be the most impactful for the minimum amount, with the limited amount of resources we have. So how do we pull those levers? And so, I like Mike's mention of the little data versus the big data. A lot of this really is a little data problem, right? But when you aggregate across the scale of the Department of the Navy, in total, it's a big data problem. But that's why we want to really do distributed workforce. We want to push that down to the edge. We want to empower those smaller teams. I think it was Amazon just the other day, they call them 2 pizza teams, which I'm going to adopt that termorology.
There you go. Yeah. 2 pizza. We hear about that all the time. And
exactly.
Cataloging data, upskilling, super important. Alan, how about at Alteryx? Give us a top priority that you're focusing on this year.
Yeah, I mean, really this, as we talk about upskilling and democratization of analytics, the education aspect is such a key, and we're really doubling down in that area, trying to make that accelerate. So we've got a new program we just launched, Spark Ed. Will continue over the next couple of years to really lean into that, where we're helping agencies, we're helping businesses and universities go on this education mission to get people more capable of leveraging AI and ML. And so whether it's at an individual level, helping an individual reskill themselves for a new career path, or whether it's upskilling so that they're learning a skill in place within their current profession, and now they're able to handle more data literate sorts of things. This is really a huge focus. So we've got a no cost approach where we provide our product capabilities as well as the education content to help individuals and organizations go on this journey. And I'm really excited to see kind of the impact. We're already at hundreds of campuses in nearly 40 countries, and watching kind of the explosive growth in that area is really exciting.
It's fantastic. We're putting a lot of very high-powered tools in the hands of these folks, and we need to make sure they're skilled to get the best use out of it. We're going to take a short break, and we're going to be right back. You're listening to the Federal Executive Forum on Federal News Network.